This is Naked by the Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. Brought to you by Vladi and Nektarios Lolios. And remember to subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help us share it with the world.
Hey everybody, it's awesome that you showed up for another extra with us today. Hope
How are you?
All doing well. I was just about to ask you the same question. As I told you, so we were chatting with Nektarios. In all sort of truth, we've been chatting a little bit before we started recording, and I was sharing this experience with Nektarios about being bashed and trolled on Instagram and how it sort of took me off guard yesterday. And it was a new experience for me. And frankly, I was like, we need to talk about this. We were like, we need to talk about, these things on Extra at some point, because they also impact our emotional well-being. But beyond that experience, which I meditated off, so I was very conscious about applying the tools, and it did help. I'm doing well. I'm here still in Karachi. My team from other places of Pakistan have come to Karachi to meet with us for a week. So it's really nice. It's very vibrant and good energy around. So quite excited about the week ahead. What about you? So I know you're traveling, so leaving Greece. How are you feeling overall?
I'm doing okay. I'm in Thessaloniki in the north of Greece. And I was thinking earlier that I now have recorded quite a few of these in a hotel room, which is kind of weird when you think about it. Yeah. But also just this thought, but also I'm looking at my image in the camera and there's a lamp by the bedside, which is slightly wonky and it's driving me insane. The fact that it's not aligned. No, I'm good.
Our uniqueness coming in.
Yeah. I was here because it's been 3 years today that my dad died, and we had every year we have a memorial service. So if I can travel, I do come. I couldn't come last year because of lockdown, which was not very nice. But today we want to talk about the episode with Owen. But I posted yesterday something on LinkedIn where I do think a lot since my dad died about our relationship, and he didn't have a really easy life for many reasons. He wasn't an entrepreneur, but he was a very creative, very active person. But he lived with a woman who suffered from depression for 40 years. And he never really talked about it. It was very much towards the end when we were sitting on a bench, probably about a couple of years before he died. So he must have been 80, and opened up to me a little bit, practically telling me that he's struggling because my mom wouldn't accept any help, and she wanted him to do everything because he's always done that. And he was like, I'm an old man. How? And this openness was for me a thing of feeling seen as an adult for the first time by my dad. So it's quite a pivotal moment. But it was also really interesting to see that it came through in a moment where he shared vulnerability with me, So
you started this podcast already, but we can deep dive. No, but in all seriousness, I hear you. I feel you. Thanks for sharing. I wanted to ask you, as you are doing, you are spending time there and you're going through this experience, and you are not at your, space at home and everything. Are you keeping up with your wellness routines? Like, I know we talked about the food and stuff, so we can leave that aside. But I was just thinking, somehow the journaling came to my mind. I was curious to ask you if you journaled today, but with no pressure, but just checking in.
No, it's interesting. I actually had a good conversation with my personal trainer about this, because I used to beat myself up and get very stressed when I didn't do it. But because when you travel, your calendar is a lot more fluid and you depend on other people, as you know, and all that. About 6 months ago, I think, when I came to Greece in May for the first time under this new life, I accepted that if I don't exercise for 10 days or if I don't do some of my practices, that's okay.
That's okay.
And it's been really groundbreaking, as silly as it sounds for me, just to go, you know what? I will go back into it when I'm back in London, which is easier for me to keep my routine. So as long as it's not too long, So when I was in Greece for a month in July, I did my yoga pretty regularly. Now it also happens that my yoga teacher is also away, so he's not doing the Zoom sessions. So it's fine. I'm actually okay. I don't need to journal, but also when you travel, and I travel, there's a lot of time of solitude, which is nice for me because I can just have time to reflect and just be.
So it's a different ways, maybe, that come in.
Yeah.
I totally hear you. I mean, it took me literally about 2 years to figure out in Pakistan that, what are some of those practices and settle them down in the space that it feels comfortable. But I think it's also different from going somewhere for 10 days and coming back. And I hear you. And I think I would probably follow the acceptance and the permission that you just talked about. I think for me, Pakistan, it was also similar to you, groundbreaking. For me, the other side was to actually realize that this is a home. So I can't run on this setup of, I'll do it back when I'm in Europe. And that was important. So I proactively started sort of figuring out like, okay, what are my practices in here? And I think that permission came with, they can be different. It doesn't have to all be the same box of tools. So yeah, this is interesting. I mean, I would love to hear from you guys how you're experiencing when you're traveling, or if you have a number of homes and stuff. But I know that that's not the topic of today's extra, but curiosity always kicks in. You beautifully open up, Nektarios, about that, experience with dad and the vulnerability. Would you want to sort of maybe continue there, and how maybe the Owen Everyman episode sort of resonated with you in what ways?
There's a bunch of things in the Owen episode. I mean, and we've talked about this also on the podcast. For me, that subject is particularly interesting because it's not something that I've grown up with, that I felt the subject of masculinity is not something that felt as a default. When you discover early on that you're quite a camp gay kid, you don't necessarily think that you're still a man in a strange way. So there's this kind of disconnect. And it took a while for me to go, hell yeah, but it's just a different flavor of it, right? But interestingly enough, also to see how it's coming up now in various pockets, right? So we've talked to Jamie Clements from the Man Down podcast, which I love because he talks exclusively about masculinity and vulnerability from different facets. Or the conversation with Owen also opened up this question about what is it about men that makes it more difficult for them to talk about emotions, to open up, to be vulnerable. It's interesting because I'd completely forgotten when we started talking, because I'm working with his startup in Berlin called Dadditude, right? Which is a self-care app for dads. But Paul, the founder, when I speak to him, he has got a 14-year-old boy. And we were talking not that long ago about how he talks about he's vulnerable with his son. And I remember listening to him thinking, how must it feel for a child to grow up with a father who is a confident man,
emotionally open.
But emotionally open, strong enough to be able to say, you know what, I'm feeling vulnerable here, right? And I'm sharing this with you. That must be so rich. I don't know if it's confusing because I've never experienced it, but I thought it was just, wow. Yeah, it's a very different relationship that you're building with your children.
Oof, I had to breathe in. But because this feels like an entry to a therapy nearly, but maybe for another time. Interesting how one episode, the one with Owen about sort of men's mental and emotional health, can be how differently we can sort of resonate with it and what we take out of it, right? But so funnily enough, when Catherine, our editor, we were ideating together about the title of this episode. And I think the first draft was around masculine energy or masculine emotional fitness with Owen from Everyman. And I literally remember the resentment I had because I was like, no. Like, we can't go the way of masculine equals men. And for a long time, I've had this now for a few years that when I started sort of exploring a little bit this, I guess, equilibrium of sort that keeps changing between what is masculine, what is feminine, what is my gender identity around being a woman and somebody being a man. And I think for me, even personally, that I sort of want to share and maybe relate also to your experience, Nektarios, because I feel like it's interesting how I feel like I can relate to you more as a woman to your gay man experience around sort of the relationship with feminine energy. And so I'll explain. But so this is what the Owen episode opened up for me, right? I felt that when I was listening and we were talking to Owen, and also when I met Everyman in New York, I was there representing my gender identity, but I actually felt energetically that I was there with my masculine self. And I could very easily relate to the masculine selves of the other people, and they were primarily men. And in my latest therapies, I actually went and explored with Sarah this space. And I think I mentioned this in the ExtraNAKED class, which was around sort of this concept of divine femininity, which my friends, when I shared it with them, they were like, oh my God, this is too much, Vladi. What are you doing? It's like, woo-hoo-hoo. And for me, it wasn't, because I realized that for a long time, I felt that I was leading, whether in my team or even in my relationship, I was leading with my masculine self, with the one that energetically I feel is more around my head, my mental, and my emotional, which is, I feel energetically is lower in my body. Like people say in your lower chakras, but I don't understand chakras that well, but in my lower part of the body, I somehow learned to recognize it as the weaker parts of myself. And I put it more into the background. And I started exploring with Sarah in my therapy, and the powerful revelation for me was to understand that, by the way, the feminine energy has been oppressed in the society for thousands of years. Like in the society, in the system, we have been operating in the masculine energies. And the people at the leadership roles, right, at the top were men. And this is what we celebrate as society. So for me, that piece to also understand that, by the way, I'm standing here on my own, but actually I'm carrying like this generational trauma. We're coming back to the trauma topic. I didn't want to, but somehow it came around the fact that I have been pushing my feminine into the background because I was finding ways to lead and have influence with my masculine, because that was somehow accepted and celebrated, was important for me. Like this was sort of groundbreaking. So I was like, okay, my now problem solved. Vladi masculine was like, okay, so how do I get my feminine out there, And so I think one was the understanding, but second was that we started looking on some of those tools and the fact that, by the way, feminine is not weak. Feminine, maybe just worth a moment, you guys might be understanding it differently, and I would be curious, Nektarios, also what it represents for you. But for me, feminine represents a lot of healing power, a lot of intuition, a lot of pause and grounding, and leading really from the place of creation. But it's less about the sharp focus, performance, doing, and again, the mental in here, right? I think I'll pause, but I would love to share at some point also how it's sort of, now it's very present in my life, this conversation and this exploration between the equilibrium and balance. And it does show up in my relationship with my co-founders again. I keep coming to this a lot in our extras, but it does. And also how, I guess, I show up as a leader to my team. And I had this recent episode around being sort of attached to, you might be the softie in the team. And I was like I felt like attacked. So I can share more about that or not, we'll see. But just want to sort of maybe leave it here that for me, the Owens episode opened this whole sort of box of masculine, feminine, and I felt strong sort of level of empathy towards men. If I looked back on historically, what environment have we really created, for what place, what energies, what type of leadership have we celebrated? And in that space, to as a man, to lead emotionally, it just feels like really risky thing to do. And yeah, so I'm glad it's changing. All that said.
And breathe.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was listening to you, and I don't think in these categories at all.
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to figure out how I can relate to that. And as you were talking, I was thinking that I've always wondered why men find it so difficult to talk about emotions. I never could make sense of it, because I was never brought up like this, and I don't know why. But I didn't grow up in an environment. Although my dad wouldn't probably open up in that way, but I always felt like, yeah, I'm struggling with something. I'm feeling low today, whatever. I was always comfortable talking about this. And for me, this is also a leveler. It makes it easier for people to connect when you open up with something vulnerable. And it was only later that people pointed out that I tend to do this. Even if I don't meet somebody, you just overshare at the beginning, and therefore there's to break down the initial barriers. But I really find it interesting that there are a lot of men out there who struggle with that. So your masculine energy for me has certain, if I were to translate this, it also comes with certain things that are prohibited, certain things that are not allowed to happen, which is show weakness, show that something isn't right. And the thing that in the conversation with Owen that was probably the most eye-opening for me was, in order to get through, you just start talking about physical weaknesses, because that's okay to talk about. Mm-hmm. So how does your body feel today? And then you can start using that to go, okay, what about a little bit behind that, right? Yeah. What you're describing and the society we built in the conversation with Jamie, ultimately, this is where we settled on. We need to be careful about the terminology that we're using, but ultimately we can question some of the effects that masculinity has brought to society, but it's ultimately about patriarchy. It's about a system that is built on certain behaviors that were defined by men. And it doesn't mean that we're criticizing the individual, right? And I felt in the whole conversation with Owen as well, I felt a little bit I feel very sensitive about terminology and nuance in this, because it's a polarized conversation, and it's easy for people to go in the binary categorizations. And you know what, when you grow up as a gay man, you get all these stupid questions about who's the man and who's the woman, the relationship, which usually refers to sex, and it's so boring. But then it happened to me like a year ago at a wedding. We were sitting at a table with my partner, and this woman asks us that. And I was like, is this really happening in 2020? And she was very defensive, but the whole table went quiet. And then she wanted to say something, in every gay couple, there's like one with a more masculine and more with a feminine energy. And I said, that's not what you're saying. But also, no, I don't think that's the case in our relationship. And in a lot of relationships that I know, is that if you want to talk about energies, everybody has both, and it balances itself out or it doesn't. But
exactly. No, I'm with you on this one. I don't think it's like, we necessarily attract somebody with more feminine energy, we lead with masculine. I mean, I really truly believe this is about coming back to yourself and figuring out who you are and how those energies, everybody has both of them, right? I love the piece that you said about the binary, because I started questioning myself, or not myself, but this construct around even feminine and masculine, because in some way they're binary as well, right? I mean, I looked into it a little bit, and there is also a lot of the spiritual, sometimes even religious sort of streams of thoughts where, let's say, the yin and yang, right? So they talk about sort of the masculine, feminine, and what they represent and things. So don't have the answer for it, but you made me think around, is this also a binary view on it? And I think Owen was also saying, like, in every man, they don't go there. They don't talk about feminine, masculine. I hear it at the same time, and maybe this is, so it's a disclaimer for me personally. it was actually quite useful to have those sort of tags and also figure out that, yes, historically, as you say, systemically, like certain type of behavior and traits and characteristics and ways of leadership was celebrated and was put on a pedestal, and the other one was pushed and was sort of seen as soft and weak. There's this other thing. Yeah, no, tell me. I see that you want to, yeah.
No, the way you were talking about this now, it's just reminded me of, so when you, the way I grew up, right, with all the different buckets, with immigrant, with gay, with overweight, with all the things that could cause problems, right? I grew up with rap music, with the early days of rap music. And there was a saying of, as a gay boy, you're not supposed to like rap music, because it was this ultra masculine culture, the very macho, very celebrating all sorts of things that were ultimate things. But I just loved the music, right? And even now at 54, I still dress like it. But at the same time, I always felt like as a gay man, I was expected to like very camp music, very kind of, and even now, right? It's like, how can you not get excited? We hear about some gay guys, but the new Lady Gaga album, you go, because I just don't, right?
Honestly,
but
I like fuck the expectation. I'm so sorry for the language, but I was like, there is no other way to say this. It's like, really, let's get rid of this, what you are supposed to or not supposed to. Sorry, go on.
No, but in the context of these categorizations, of course, people reduce things to easily digestible chunks, right? So you get put into boxes. And part of it is just fighting against these boxes. So another way for me to interpret your masculine, feminine energy is ultimately saying, look, somebody, for whatever reason, created these boxes and people try to push in because it's the only thing they understand. And you go, no, the boxes aren't there, or they're maybe a bit more flexible.
Fluid. Yeah, very, very much fluid. There's this last one thing I wanted to share, which was where people are referring to what has happened through COVID as sort of also a shift in terms of coming back to the sort of those two narratives, like masculine and feminine, that we are moving towards more feminine sort of phase in life for all of us. And it has to do with the fact that COVID actually slowed us down, and we looked back a lot into ourselves, we reflected, we connected, and those are some of the pair book, how people sort of describe those traits that are related to feminine. And when I was listening to it, I started sort of thinking about what I'm seeing around myself in our teams, and even frankly, the conversation that you and I have, the fact that we are doing Naked, the fact that we are talking with founders who naturally in the past have been seen as, you need to lead with certain, performance and hustle and all of it, kill others and fight it all. And people are really becoming more vulnerable and more grounded, and they lead also from the emotion. And I think there is something in there. So I guess it's hopefully, I guess from my side, guys, if this is of an interest, I feel like it's a space to explore, and there is no one answer to it in terms of like, what's the right way to look at this. But certainly an interesting piece for the self-exploration in terms of the wholeness of ourselves, right? And from where do we lead, and how we, I guess even Nektarios, how we accept ourselves for who we are, and certainly a big one for myself.
That for me is probably the biggest thing in all of this is learning just to accept, maybe going back to our favorite subject, which is self-reflection, just recognize all these things in you and just be friends with it, right? I used to hate that I was a little bit camp sometimes. I used to feel a little bit embarrassed when I was a bit too feminine in my behavior, and I tried to compensate for it. And now it's like, look, this is who I am, and I have my camp moments and I have my non-camp moments, and deal with it. It's just like, I don't have an issue with it anymore. Why would you have an issue, right? So there's this also, just learning to love yourself. And it sounds like such a cliche, but if you can acknowledge and celebrate what's inside you.
I was just about to say, it moves even from acceptance, and then the next step I feel is like, let's celebrate it, because it's not just accepting something that it's a false part of ourselves, right? It's an equally sort of important part of who we are. And I'm hopeful that we're going to see also more leaders, whether men or women, to actually lead from this place, because I think we very much are in need of that. So that's my hope for today.
I think it's a nice point to end that conversation.
I think so.
Well,
so
thank you, Vladi.
You too, and have a safe journey. And thank you guys for showing up. See you. Oh, we'll see you probably after Christmas. Well, holidays, taking Christmas away because not everybody celebrates. I know. But,
I like a little kind of monologue that you just
said. So this is our last extra before break. So have a beautiful December, January, wherever you are. And we'll speak to you after New Year's, which everybody celebrates. Not at the same time. Oh my God. Okay, I have to go off this recording.
Okay. Bye, Vladi.
Bye, guys. Ciao.
You've been listening to Naked by The Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. To learn more about our work, sign up to our newsletter or visit thefuturefarm.co, where you can also apply to be a Naked guest. Naked is produced by Dan Turgel and edited by Catherine Volker. And remember, subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help share it with the world.